the industry, and that's really the new energy consumer that we have and what it really means. For years, we've talked about, certainly domestically here in the United States, about keeping the lights on. And I think more and more, I think that we all realize that keeping the lights on is not enough anymore. And I say that because I think that we have certainly done extensive research here domestically with regards to the customer, today's customer. They still want, power 24/7 and reliable, and most of all, affordable. And then we have something that I would call energy elites. And that is the more energy aware customer that is looking for everything from choice, that is looking for energy efficient options, how to be more sustainable. And that's the trends that we're actually seeing more and more of. And I can't think of two people better to be able to talk about, certainly from an EDP perspective and from Enel, and the work that you all have done. So I want to talk a little bit and dig down first on just those sort of emerging customer expectations and how we meet them, and more importantly, where we meet them. So Antonio, I thought I'd have you go first and talk about, where's that happening in your business, and what are you seeing, on the horizon, not just, right now, but what do you see coming up as well that you all are planning for?
Okay, I think this is always a combination on supply and demand at the end of the day. Starting from the customer side, the expectations of customers are rising quite dramatically. And they are rising quite dramatically because, our phones. Their customer experience across their life is increasing quite dramatically. And why not in my energy? And so a lot of the things that they take for granted that, I want an answer and I want an answer now, they are placing these type of expectations over utilities. And so utilities, we always tend to think that we know our customers, but quite frankly, we need to be cognizant that we actually don't know. And we only start to understand that we don't know our customers when we actually do the job on trying to know the customers. And then suddenly we realize that's the case. We typically start with customer journeys. I think it's a methodology that everyone is familiar. Just to start with the customer journey is the customer journey with me. And so that just frames the way we try to think about customers. And so I think that utilities have really start being more customer centric. And I think they have been quite surprised by the facts. Just an example. By using digital technologies, you can actually engage a lot more your customers. You drive down your costs, which is a good thing, and you improve your customer satisfaction. It's pretty unbelievable how much this occurs. And even in a business that is, it's competition. You are competing for your customer. Competing based on digital technologies actually enables you to reduce the churn rate of your customers. We had these examples of customers that move from EDP and then move back because they really like the app. And this, app, is that significant? It seems so, because his quote was actually very interesting. Another thing has to do with the bills. We have sent bills for centuries to our customers in paper. Then we moved to PDFs. But, PDFs are actually, it's the same thing as a paper in electronic form. But there are technologies today that enable you to do more. Why not an interactive billing? Why not something that if I don't want to see that much of detail, I just know how much I have to pay, when I have to pay, period, done. I don't want to see more. But then suddenly there is a figure. I don't understand this figure, why it grew. You can start clicking and it starts giving you more detail. These are the type of experiences that engage customers and enables you to also drive down your costs and be more competitive.
Thank you. Let me first of all thank EI for the invitation, and then specify that, as you see, I'm here representing the Enel Foundation, so I'm not representing the perspective of the operational part of Enel, but more the perspective of a foundation that has been established by the group to help the group be placed also in the right part, the exploratory part of the diagram that we saw earlier this morning, presented by Chris. So what we do is basically try to interpret the trends that are taking place in the energy transition at global level, and doing this also by engaging the stakeholders that are interested in that. So from this perspective, what I would like to comment on your question, Brian, is first of all that the customers' expectations have to be addressed first of all by bearing in mind that the sustainability concept should be embedded in all the operations that we have. A second aspect is that the type of customer that you are addressing should be addressed in a very different way, whether it is an industrial customer or a residential home customer, or if your customer is a transportation service, or if your customer is a city, for example. The type of services that you can offer are very, very different. But let me also specify that in this global perspective, there are also customers that are associated to the need to expand energy access worldwide. So if we have to approach customers that are not in our industrialized world, but in a world where there is a huge energy deficit, then there the approach should again be different.
I want to get to that too, particularly what Enel Foundation and what EDP, what you're doing to actually bring power to the billions that actually don't have energy access. So I'll get to that as the last question. But there was a panel this morning on getting to yes, and I think that when it comes to your point, Giuseppe, about stakeholders and communication and exactly how we're engaging them in our sort of transformation that's going on. Tell me what you all are doing individually at the company level to really do that outreach to stakeholders, because it's one thing to really believe it internally, it's another thing to exercise it externally. So tell me what you're doing.
Well, again, from the foundation perspective, the way we engage stakeholders is, first of all, to try to together with them to think a little bit ahead of the issues before they come to the table of a specific regulatory decision that has to be made. So we engage them in various forms. We promote and undertake studies concerning specific issues, often in partnership with academia. But then we place a lot of attention also in, let me say, making sense of the academic and scientific results that we produce. And we are at present working a lot also in developing tools which could be visual tools or more use of social media in order to disseminate the results. To make a concrete examples, the way, for example, we have engaged the regulator on the overall issue of resiliency of networks, which, for example, in the context of Italy has been particularly relevant recently because we have had multiple occurrence of extreme events, be them earthquakes or floods in the recent years. We have been approaching the regulator earlier before it has to actually make a decision on how, for example, to revise the way the investments in distribution networks are remunerated. In a conversation and in exchanges on what could be innovative methods to take into account the need to increase the resiliency of distribution networks, which again has to deal with the expectation of customers, because they do not want to be disconnected, especially when there are extreme events.
So we actually have a stakeholder relations department at the same level, at the corporate level, at the same level as the shareholder relations department. So this just to show, the importance is make it visible in the organization, and this department actually goes every year through a process of aligning what are the key stakeholders, what are the things that we want to test those stakeholders. They test the stakeholders, and then they create a plan for the next year to just follow up and ensure that we improve the relationship with those stakeholders on the key areas that matter for them. That's something that we do for, really wide open stakeholders. The definition is really open. On the customer side, we try as much as possible, which is something that takes time to reach to consumer associations. For example, every time we change our contracts on the supply side, we send before to the consumer association, please give us your comments. This places them as representatives that they are actually of customers, and it just shows, it creates a sense of trust that is very relevant. So when we change our bill, we send to them, say, does this improve the way customers read their bills or not? These are the type of things that you can do. And on the customer side, people talk about design thinking. It's a methodology that a lot of people are aware. But again, today, it's incredibly easy to test ideas in the market. It's not, we have moved from having an idea, designing the idea, going to the market, and then seeing the results. And quite frankly, whenever we have an idea, say, this is the great idea, this is the Coke in the desert, and it doesn't work. It was failed by the market. Now we just skip that part and we just test ideas in the market. And quite frankly, we have been more successful with this type of approach. So, and that's why we acknowledge that we know less about customers than we think we know. So now it's almost kind of the first level hypothesis is that we don't know. We are going to test in the market. And even when we have tests in the market, and even the tests fail in the sense that you didn't discover anything on the tests. It just enables you to understand that, even testing the market is a difficult thing. But if you don't go on that path, you don't know.
That's interesting. I like your concept on design thinking. I was having a conversation with Bob Rowe earlier because a lot of work that he's doing right now is around that very concept and a project that he's working on. But I wanted to kind of zoom out a little bit and just talk about the global energy market. We say domestically here that we represent 5% of the GDP, but we actually say we represent the first 5% of the GDP because the rest is not possible without us. Tell us just a little bit about how you two would approach communicating the actual value of electricity that doesn't seem so simple, because we know how complex it is. We know how complex it is to do it reliably, affordably, but to also, meet that increasingly clean mark too. So how would you do that with knowing that we represent something so fundamentally important to everything that we do in everyday life? How would you communicate that simply?
We have tried several ways. Starting with how much does it cost to charge your phone on a yearly basis, and how much that is insignificant. I mean, how much you pay for the telco company, that without that €1 a year is worthless. But quite frankly, we have not been successful. And at the same time, we need to think about it, does it actually matter to the customers? I mean, it matters to us, but it doesn't matter to the customers. So should we continue to force this to matter to customers? Probably not. Customers, their mode is connect and forget. And that's the way they have always lived. And that's the way they want to live. The first thing that we've noticed when we try to push some of them to distributed generation is that they start to, really look into energy for the first time. Really understanding the difference between power and energy. And probably people will be a lot more engaged as these things will actually come to their homes. Then it gets more significant. And so one of the things that we have struggled, and we haven't found the answer yet, is we want to ensure that the customer hires, contracts with us, forgets everything else because he knows he's in good hands. But at the same time, if he forgets us and one of our competitors goes, then he suddenly wakes and we may lose the customer. So we need to find a way where we stay relevant to this customer, probably in some kind of notifications that are not related with the connect and forget, but are related with things that matter to the customer. So their home, tickets to the cinema, these type of things that are not energy related, but can really make a sense of you stay relevant to your customer.
Yeah, well, I agree with Antonio. It's always a difficult task to express complex things in a simplified way. However, I would like to say that perhaps we should find a way of explaining the value of electricity in a simple and effective way, also to policymakers, to regulators, because, as Antonio said, the customer decides based on his or her perceptions, and if, for example, you have an incentive to just make an example, an incentive to install a natural gas boiler, an efficient natural gas boiler that improves its competitiveness towards in relation to the electric alternative, the heat pump, then the customer will go there. So what we are trying to do is, again, as a foundation now, to address policymakers, regulators with stories that can explain to them in a simple way what is the value of electricity in relation to some essential policy goals that, especially in the European context, are being pursued by policymakers and regulators. So we are developing a concept of that we are calling electricity triangle, in which we show how electricity is a clean energy carrier that has the immense benefit of being able to accept a clean generation source, such as renewables, without too much difficulties, and it's again clean at the point of use. So our aim is to, by making this in a simplified way with policymakers, with regulators, that certain aspects at present, as I think again you, Antonio, highlighted, create for some policy regulatory decisions also in the structure of pricing a relative disadvantage of electricity can be corrected because they are better perceived.
Before we go and take a couple of questions, I wanted to end with something, Giuseppe, that you had mentioned. And I know that Enel Foundation and also EDP, you both have done extensive work with regard to energy access around the world to the billions of people that don't have it. Can you just share with our guests today a little bit about what your current activities are, where you've been, and sort of where that's headed?
Sure. Well, as Enel Foundation, we are working a lot on capacity building initiatives. We are at present in the last few years been concentrating quite a lot on Africa. Where we have developed and are developing projects that go from the publication of books that explain success cases, success stories in getting access to power for people, to initiatives that are aimed at developing skills in partnership with African universities, and that are aimed at particularly for example, at particularly talented master and PhD students from African university to develop technical, managerial, and regulatory skills. And the other thing that I would like to mention is that we are also developing some thinking to try to overcome what sometimes is a kind of war of religion between what is the right approach between going for a decentralized system or being loyal to the classical scheme of centralized systems. The approach that we are trying to, the innovative approach that we are trying to offer is an approach that sees the decentralized approach by the development of mini grids as a kind of a progressive way by which people who lack access to energy can progressively escalate the ladder of getting access to energy. And this means, again, helping and providing the capacity to think of mini grids as items that have to be somehow standardized in order to facilitate progressively their connection in such a way that they can progressively build more extensive networks, which in the end can improve the abundance of power that is available to people.
So we did a very interesting project in a refugee camp called Kikuna, and the project, we put 1 million in that project, and we recovered that 1 million. So it was not, it was a zero balance project. And the idea was to just put the business-driven perspective on how to help these people. And what happened was that through solar technology and other things, we were able to really improve the lives of those people. Just to give some actually very interesting the way the technology was deployed. So, the students, the young people, they were getting a lamp that they will take to their home, fully charged, and that would only work for 1 day. The next day, they would have to go to school. And in the school, they could charge in the solar panel. And that just increased the number of students attending school. Then there was some kind of public lighting, some other elements on taking water from the ground, and also solar ovens. Very basic technology, but that just release people from burning kerosene and any existing wood. And all of these type of things together improve dramatically the lives of those people. We then try to scale these, we reach out the United Nations. By that time, the Commissioner for Refugees was Antonio Guterres, the present Secretary of the United Nations. He's Portuguese, so it was easy to get the approach. And we were not able, as a company, to scale up these type of initiatives. And the reasoning had to do with, how come, how do you have a commercial business and at the same time aid needs? So, although all the efforts that we have done, we were not able to come across these. So we are still doing some type of projects, but nothing the way we were looking after, that we saw that there is tremendous value to these people. There is there is a business value to this, but that it's you are not taking a bad use of those people. You are actually releasing these people from burning very expensive kerosene that brings all other problems at the refugees camps and so on. And then, it's something that if any of the presidents have a nice idea, I would be glad to take it to my colleagues.
I think you probably got some ideas in this room. I think it's time for us to open it up to a couple of questions for our two panelists. Any? Barbara?
Hi, Sandra Bear with Civic Smartscapes. I'm curious about the what utilities are doing, what you're doing to really engage citizens. You talked about the stakeholder team that you have, but in my work with smart cities, I think that there's a feeling that the utilities are sort of resistant to really working together, to using analytics about the effectiveness of water systems or transportation or lighting to really show the benefit of what the electric utility is doing. So I'd love to hear more specifics about how that's really happening in the real world. Thank you.
Let me answer. Thank you for your question. Let me answer in two ways. From the perspective of the operational company, I must say that we work quite a lot with cities, because we have, especially in Italy, the distribution network that is an essential element of the life of cities. And just to make an example, in the city of Florence, we have worked a lot with the local community, local municipality to build together what is now, at least in Italy, the most effective infrastructure for electric transportation in Italy. From the perspective of the foundation, we have in the recent past done quite an extensive comparative study on what is called the urban metabolism of megacities, to try to explain the concept in a simpler way, as we said before. Basically, we studied how the flows of energy, water, material, waste work in the biggest cities in the world, which, by the way, have grown from, I think, a few in the 1970 to around 30 now. I mean, mega cities are those who have more than 10 million inhabitants. And with this study, the role of utilities in improving in a more sustainable way the so-called urban metabolism of megacities has emerged very, very clearly. And in particular, the role, for example, of electric transportation, but also of being able to introduce integrated infrastructures in the urban areas.
So there is a lot of value to have an integrated perspective about all the infrastructure and how they intertwine with each other, and more specifically with how the new technologies are also going to impact the way the infrastructure was planned and decided in the past, because a lot of that infrastructure was a result of organic growth, and now we are having different technologies and different interplays between the same infrastructure. The problem of this is that at the municipality level, a lot of this is completely fragmented. A lot of these services are also performed by the municipality themselves, and it's very hard for utilities to be in the front line. They want to be in the front line, they want to be the partner of municipalities to help think about, how do you tie all of this together? But it's one thing is to be really positive and really energetic about this. The other thing is you are being successful or not, particularly on the other side. So people talk a lot about smart cities. They overuse the wording until the level that it loses meaning, and that's a big concern. But there is, and picking up on the wording, design thinking. So let's imagine that we are talking about electric mobility, and we start thinking about areas that we called e-hubs, areas where there are a lot of fast chargers. It will take about 10 minutes to fast charge your car, and so you need to think about services for the people for those 10 minutes. But suddenly, we are reaching autonomous vehicles. Suddenly, you don't need those 10 minutes. So that e-hub is a completely different thing, and probably completely located in a different place. So the technologies are moving so fast, and they are changing so fundamentally the way we work on things that we need to go back to the drawing board, clean sheet of paper, and start thinking about, if I didn't have this infrastructure, how would I do this? And then start reaching the stakeholders and try to say, do you want to join me on this and see how this will take us? When you then start putting politics, regulation, and so on, it starts to be more challenging. But I think we'll have to make it the way.
How about one more question? Pierre? It's already on.
Yeah. Utilities are making a great work, a great job in investing in new technologies, helping communities. You mentioned decentralization versus centralization. We all see where it's going. As you know, Europe, with the recent winter package, is now opening, let's say, a nice market for what they call renewable energy communities, which will be a special environment where people will be invited to develop, use, consume energy in a protected environment, consumer way. The question I have is, this is a great opportunity, quote unquote. I'm from the utility sector, so I'm careful, for the GAFAs, because these communities will represent a lot of market value, a lot of data. How can utilities fight against the GAFAs that will sooner or later provide free electricity in exchange of access to that data. What is your answer to that?
I think we are always kind of worried about the GAFAs, but our world is pretty cash intensive, low margin, not that big of a growth, and I'm missing a fourth one. Okay, sorry. So they are not that interested to GAFAs. Now, okay, but you have a lot of data, and this data can have can be very relevant for them to monetize. Not sure if these things are incompatible. I mean, you may have this business going the same way, not the same way, but evolving in a way, and their business evolving in another way. I think that there will be a big fight over who owns the customer at their home. And the GAFAs are the natural owners for some of the equipment that we are seeing starting over, the echoes and things like that. But the echoes are really, okay, you use that once or twice, but then does it actually starts to manage my washing machine along with the power that I'm generating at this moment in my solar panel? It can do that, but consumers always think first on their utility of their lifetime to do this type of business. So in our perspective, and the things that we are doing is, first of all, we stop seeing the customer as a consumer. We start seeing the customer as a meter, and we entered in the customer home. That's the first step. So, for example, we are now at the scale of Portugal, going to 1,000 homes every day, entering in their homes, doing audits, changing their, so if the appliance goes bust, we solve that problem and so on. And we start seeing, by working with the customers, a lot of new business opportunities that are just by serendipity showing up by just being with the customer. So we think that by being in the customer home, we will always be there, and it's going to be very hard for some place to take us. I mean, they will have their place, but there's nothing like you be at your customer home. So, I would say that seeing new services that goes beyond energy, but just uses the relationship that you have with your customers is the way to go.
Bob?
Following up, and Antonio, I love everything you said, from customer journey to customer experience, particularly talking about fast failing with new products as opposed to doing pilots. My footnote to the GFAs is I think your fourth factor is regulated. They don't want to be regulated. I'm going to push back a little bit in terms of how much information, how much access they have to the customer. And I'm concerned that, in fact, they probably know our customers better in many cases than we do. I think you're taking the right approach. I'd love to have you say a little bit more about the kind of customer work you're doing, services you're offering, again, not just through pilots, but through getting products out there, how you're using the information that you're developing to better serve your customers.
Okay. So first of all, let me say that we have a lot of information. We are trying to be more smart about the use of that information. We are not even in a bit where we should be. Okay. So on the service side, and I'm just First, I'm going to go on residential, then I'm going to B2B. On the residential side, we have something called Funciona, which means it works. And it's basically something that we do an audit to the infrastructure, to the energy infrastructure, so electricity and gas. And then it's a kind of insurance product where if your white appliance gets, has a malfunction, we will deal with free of charge. We will deal with the malfunction. And that was a very important service that we have. It's actually a very important service from a EBITDA perspective, because if your margin on the supply side shrinks, you need to find ways of monetizing and creating value from the relationship that we have with your customer. So that's one of the things that we have done. We have done another product. It's a very it's an insurance-like product, which is we called Safe Bill. So basically, someone dies, you lose your job or something, your bill is paid for the next year. It was a great thing. I mean, it costs €1 a month. I mean, it's very cheap, but at the same time, it increases dramatically your margin because €1 is a lot, and it reduces your credit risk. So this was created in the midst of the crisis, and it's sustained, and now the default rate are really, really low, and we just have something that is always creating some additional value. We are creating additional values, additional services. So from changing boilers and things like that, we are actually creating a marketplace of new appliances, because sometimes your appliance gets busted. There's no way, I mean, it's 20 years old. There's no way you can fix it. That's the moment where you can actually sell an appliance to your customer and say, I will deliver this appliance tomorrow or even today. And that for the customer is great. It's additional source of value and this additional source of customer satisfaction and customer loyalty. And this is on the non-energy related things. On the energy related things, we have started selling PV very early in the process. We have developed ourselves our energy management system that there weren't any in the market. So, we don't think that we are a technology powerhouse to design ourselves a system, but because there was nothing in the market, we designed it ourselves. We learned a lot, and by serendipity, things came, and now, for example, this equipment is able to ensure something that distributors will recognize as very valuable. So in Portugal, you have contracted power. So I contract 6.9 kilowatt kVAs. Okay, if I go above that, it shuts down. Okay, so I need to stay below 6.9 kVAs, and then you have additional thresholds, and for those additional thresholds, you pay for the contracted power. So consumers are incentivized to have a lower contracted power. Now this system does something like this. You increase your toaster 2 kW. It's a lot, right? And suddenly it would shut down your main switchboard. What happens is that it closes your heating, or it closes your swimming pool, or it closes something. Then the toaster ends and it starts it again without your notice. I mean, you don't notice, you don't care. That's the way customers are looking to energy management systems. I don't want to schedule these things. I just want to answer very plain questions, very human questions, and then this should do the trick for me. And so doing this, making this connection is the challenge for utilities. And we have started also with storage. The numbers in Portugal, at least for now, the payback period is around the same for the life of the storage. So it doesn't pay, and it's very expensive. But we think that this will evolve fast. And if you actually combine solar with storage, you will be able to start selling subscription, 20-year subscription, 15-year subscription to your customers. And that will make the life of GAFAs more difficult.
Saw a lot of pens moving on that question. So Giuseppe, Antonio, thank you very much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Let's give them a hand, folks.
Please give a hand to Brian for doing an excellent job on the panel.